I think people are afraid that we want to remove all the dams in the world.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World with Ben Goldsmith. Today, I'm going to be talking to Pao Fernández Garrido in Spain about rivers and how we can liberate them and rewild them from the concrete straitjackets that have been placed upon them during the last 150 years. These are weirs and dams and other obstructions that cause all kinds of harms, some of which we understand, much of which we don't yet understand. Rivers are sacred to us humans. Think of the Mersey in Liverpool, or the Seine in Paris, or the mighty Guadalquivir that crosses Andalusia, passing through Cordoba and Seville. Rivers are so important to our very existence, practical, cultural, and spiritual. So it seems to me an atrocity that we've straitjacketed them in this way. Pao, Spain tops the charts in Europe for dam removal. Why is the dam removal movement taking a hold so effectively in Spain?
Hi, Ben. Thank you for this opportunity. And what a good question, because many people ask me that question saying, but Spain, you're so dry, your climate, you need water, right? But then I answer them with a question. How many dams do we have in Spain? And we didn't have this answer until just a couple of years ago. And the situation is that we have many more dams and weirs and culverts than what we need. More than half are not in the inventories. They are not being used. And they are breaking the law. Because in the Spanish law, once a dam owner or weir owner stops using this infrastructure, or the infrastructure is not relicensed, the owner must pay for removing this barrier. So it's in our law. It's not something about ecologist protest or anything. It's about safety and legislation.
And dams in Europe are in many cases obsolete, right? Do you have any idea of how many dams and weirs there are across all of Europe? And do we have any idea roughly of what proportion of those dams serve no useful purpose today at all?
Yeah, well, we had no idea about this until finally in 2016, we got a fantastic Horizon 2020 grant project, which is fully funded by the European Commission. And thanks to this 4-year project called AMBER, Adaptive Management of Barriers in European Rivers, after almost 3 years and a half trying to collect all existing inventories in 36 countries in continental Europe, we found out that at least we have 629,000. And why do I say at least? Because many of these inventories were incomplete. So what we did, thanks to 20 partners making this AMBER project happen, we went to the field. We did a field validation. With those inventories, we went to the river, and there were more than 2,000 kilometers validated. And there, we found out that at least we have double barriers. We have at least 1.2 million. That's the minimum. So my question to you, if in an inventory, you are not using all of them because many are useless or obsolete or abandoned, and at least there's double number, what's happening with those? They're there with no use, you see?
So what you're saying is that pretty much every river in Europe, large and small, and especially in Spain, has been straitjacketed along its length by these concrete structures. And the most obvious negative impact that comes to mind when you think of these dams is the blockage for migratory species. European eels, for example, used to be one of the main food sources for humanity, one of the most abundant freshwater fish. They breed in an extraordinary life cycle out in the Sargasso Sea near Bermuda, and they get washed back on the currents and move their way up European rivers, right up into the smallest creeks and streams. The movement of European eels has been impeded such that their population has crashed by more than 90% in recent decades. Salmon, of course, salmon numbers have declined dramatically all over Europe. Trout, So that's the most obvious ecological impact, right? And you used to work, Pao, in the construction of fish passes.
Yeah.
Is there anything that can be done to restore the movement of migratory fish without destroying these dams?
It's very difficult. Because I used to design fish passage, as you say, you're right. But fish passage are like a bandage, like una tirita, a bandage. It's
a Band-Aid.
A Band-Aid, thank you, a Band-Aid. And it doesn't solve all the problem. And in a fish way, it's very, very, very difficult to make it work well. The efficiency of a fish way, the best fish way you can ever design, can work up to 90% of efficiency. So imagine you have a river, you have 20 barriers. Imagine that you have the money and the expertise and the knowledge to design the best fish ways. At the end of those 20 fish ways that the fish has to go up, you are not going to have any fish up anymore, because every time the fish pass the fishway, 10% at least 10% does not find the fishway. So after 10, 15, 20 fishways, there's not going to be fish up to the source, you see? So it's not the ultimate and the best solution at all.
Because here in Britain, we have a project called Unlocking the Severn.
Yeah.
And when I first read about it, I assumed this was about removing concrete dams and barriers along the mighty Severn in Western Britain. But in fact, mostly it's about building fish passes, which I agree are a sort of stopgap or a kind of minimalist solution. So what happens to these migratory species if you do liberate the rivers? If you remove the dams from these rivers, what happens?
But it's not only about the fish, which I completely agree that it's like the most impactful for your eye that you can really see. But it's not only about fish that, of course, the population would bounce back, will revive. And hopefully, that my dream would be that in the future, we could rely and have fisheries, free, safe, sustainable fisheries that we can feed upon. But it's not only about fish. Some people think that we do only this because of fish, but it's also about erosion problems. When you have dams and weirs, they create erosion problems downstream. And it's about recharging aquifers. Aquifers, underground water, it's the best way to preserve water and to store water overall during summer. Because when you store water in a reservoir, there is such a huge, gigantic loss of water every day through evaporation, right? But when you store the water underground, there is no loss of evaporation, and the riparian, the river, the forest, actually, can survive. So it's even more. It's about coastal erosion, beach erosion, water quality. When you store water in a reservoir, the water quality drops dramatically, because you start having problem of oxygen, temperatures problems, and even algae booming and problems, So it's not only about fish.
So let's take those one by one. So the one of the issues you just highlighted is the issue of sediment moving downstream. And of course, as the sediment is washed down the river system, you end up with sediment islands in the delta, you end up with beaches along the coast. So if you build dams, you kill off the ecosystem of the delta, and you also ultimately kill off the beaches, and sand is disappearing.
Exactly. And actually you have a living case that the Ebro Delta in Spain is disappearing because it doesn't have the sediments, that it needs to arrive every day, and all the beaches along the coast.
And in a country like Spain, of course, tourism depends upon having beaches. So the dams are destroying the beaches. The second point you mentioned cuts to the issue of clean water, and presumably the principal reason why a country like Spain or any other country in the warmer parts of the world constructs these dams is for the availability of water.
Yeah.
And what you just described to us is that dams don't necessarily augment the availability of water, because you have an issue of evaporation in the reservoir behind the dam. And when it's hot, vast amounts of water is evaporating and being lost altogether.
Exactly.
But you also have an issue with the aquifers, as you explained. And in a natural river system, the water is percolating through the bed of the river and down into the natural aquifer, where it is stored away from the heat, away from the sunlight.
Exactly. That's the thing. And if you have read the news this summer in Spain, our reservoirs were so low that there was a point where villages could not drink the water of those reservoirs because the level dropped so down that there is a percentage of water in a reservoir that there's too much turbidity,
Pollution.
and you cannot drink that water. So in these villages, even though they have huge reservoirs, they needed trucks with water to be able to drink this summer. So reservoir, it's not the best way to store water if you have the chance to choose. Yeah.
Can you explain why dams prevent the recharging of natural aquifers? Because you'd imagine that those reservoirs are losing water down into the aquifer.
Okay, when you put a wall, an infrastructure, a dam in the river, first of all, you are changing the water table. Because now, downstream the dam, you have very little head of water, okay? And upstream, you have a lot. So you are modifying the water table. That's first. And second, upstream the dam, you start having a lot of sediment, being accumulated. And all those sediments create a very thick cover, let's say, that impede sometimes to filter the water. You're putting like una capa impermeable,
An impermeable surface at the base of the reservoir.
Thank you, Ben. Exactly. So that impedes water to filter, So that would be an example of how it works.
So these dams that have been built all across Europe not only impede the movement of migratory fish and thereby collapse a vital part of the ecosystem in which enormous amounts of nutrition move from the oceans up deep inland, providing food for all kinds of other species, providing nutrition for the ecosystem.
Totally.
But they also don't fulfill the very purpose for which they were built, which is to hold back and store water for humanity. There's been a lot of talk of beavers in recent years as the beaver has made a comeback from near extinction across Europe and even in Britain. And one of the most exciting things about beavers is that they dam up the small rivers and the small creeks and so on, and they hold water back following heavy rainfall, thereby regulating the hydrological cycle and reducing the incidence of flash flooding and drought, all while creating new habitat. Yeah. Beavers are now back in Spain on the Ebro, on the Tagus, on the Duero, even potentially on the Guadalquivir in the south. The question I have for you is, why are beaver dams okay if concrete man-made dams are not?
That's a fantastic question. And it's, at first, you might think it's the same, but it's not. Think about it. First of all, beavers are not going to build a dam in the main stem, in your artery of the watershed, which is the most important. They don't build dams, barriers in the biggest system, okay? Your artery, which is the most important one to protect. Second, they build these barriers with branches, with trunks, and those are not completely, again, the word, Ben, impermeables. How was the word?
Yeah, beaver dams are permeable. Water runs through them and around them.
Exactly. So the nutrients and the water still goes through it, but concrete not. And the third thing is that after a 3, 4, 5 year flooding, okay, they usually break. So they have to build it again, and that's super positive. But a concrete dam doesn't break every 2 or 3 or 5 years,
This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com. What is the natural life of a dam? I mean, presumably if sediment is building up behind these dams, ultimately there must come a point when it presents a danger, and the authorities will have to remove many of them anyway.
Totally.
We've seen this a little bit in the United States with the 4 huge dams which are being removed from the Klamath River in the border with Oregon and California. Can we hope that eventually these dams become so unsafe that the government is forced to act?
There are several cases actually like that, because people think that sometimes in their mind that the dams are like waterfalls, and that they are man-made infrastructure, so they need maintenance. And sometimes after 50, 100 years, 120 years, that maintenance, it's very expensive for the benefit that infrastructure gives. So many times it's cheaper to just demolish the dam than even refurnish it, to make it safer. So in some cases, like for example, I would like to tell you the case in France, in La Sélune River in Normandy. That's the river where the biggest dam, the tallest dam in Europe has been demolished in 2019. It was 36 meter high, and it was huge. But maintaining that dam and trying to put a fish weir was so expensive for the little benefit that it gave, because the hydropower installed there in that huge dam, that power is going to be completely covered by 3 windmills, because the dam was a century old and it created a huge water problem. People could not bathe in that reservoir. It was forbidden because cyanobacteria, cyanobacteria, how do you say, the blue-green
algae.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So they just removed it, and they hope that, water quality, it increases and improves, and hopefully also that they get again migratory fish, because that Sélune basin was full of migratory fish. It was one of the most important fishing points in France to fish salmon, trout, eel, and that's completely gone because of that dam.
A lot of these dams exist for the purpose of producing what we call green electricity. Hydro is kept in the mix with wind and solar as a green, clean option and an alternative to fossil fuels. My view is that dams are not green energy. Yes, they may be renewable to a degree. And yes, they may be zero carbon to a degree. Although if you take into account the emissions arising from the sediment and the anaerobic digestion of other debris falling to the bottom of the reservoir, it's debatable that they are emission-free.
Correct.
But they're certainly not green because they destroy these complex and vital ecosystems that we call rivers. So there's presumably great hope in the fact that wind and solar are getting cheaper and cheaper. Solar is now demonstrably the cheapest source of power for more than 2/3 of the world's population. So the point you made about dams becoming economically non-viable, the maintenance becoming non-justifiable, presumably is accelerated by ever cheaper solar. Are you seeing that in Spain now, where the operators of these hydroelectric dams are starting to lose money?
Yeah, I've seen some cases, but the problem now with at least through newspaper and the media, that you hear and read that we have an energy crisis, things are now going backwards. But before this energy crisis, it was happening that wind power was being more beneficial than hydropower, definitely, because many times these hydropower infrastructures, they survive because of subsidies. We need to remember that too. But you are completely right. I would like to remember something, that it's true that we, at some point right now, we need dams for irrigation, for water supply, even for hydropower. But I want people to be aware that you are completely right for what you said, that people don't have in their heads, they are not aware that dams have a huge impact. So, and what we have been doing for more than a century is placing these dams in points of the river basins that cause huge damage. And I want to give you an example. If I don't have any other choice, Ben, and I have to put a block in your veins, would it be the same if I put you a block in your artery that in some veins of your hand? it won't have the same impact. If I put a block in your artery, you will instantly die. And if I put some blocks in the veins of your hands, you will survive. You won't be able to use your hands possibly, but you will survive. Watersheds work the same way. And we have been placing dams in the main streams and in some, let's call them veins, that are very damaging. And this is what we need to completely change with the knowledge and the technology we have in the 21st century. We cannot keep managing water basins as a century ago. So we need to choose and start analyzing, okay, in the future, what do we want for our future in the next 50 years? Oh, we would like to completely free the main stream of the watershed and maybe keep these other weirs or dams in some tributaries, which maybe they don't give so much nutrients and sediments than these other tributaries. There is a bunch of parameters that you have to study to see which tributaries are more productive and important, so it's very important. And yes, we keep forgetting, and many people are not aware that reservoirs create green gas emissions, like methane. So it's very hypocrite to say, I think hydropower is green when actually the impacts are huge.
I love the analogy you just used, Pao, of a river system as being like a body or a living being. And that idea that river systems are living beings and that they have spirits of their own has been central to indigenous culture and spirituality for millennia. And even today, as I mentioned at the start, rivers are central to the identity of people who live by them. The Thames to us in London is an absolutely central part of our existence. They mean an enormous amount to us. And there's something sacrilegious about the way we've placed these blockages, these straitjackets all over them. But it's even worse when you start to understand that they make the problems they're trying to solve worse, that they exacerbate water shortages, that they reduce water quality, that they destroy natural aquifers, which are nature's way of storing fresh water for us, and that they break the migratory pathways of fish that forever have provided enormous amounts of protein and other nutrition to human society and to people. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about the impact that dams have on the availability of protein and food for humans?
I would love to actually highlight that. Thank you. Because in Europe, we have completely forgotten that it was a very important food source. And we have forgotten that because, if our great-great-grandparents will, be here and they will see that we don't rely on the fish our rivers anymore, they will be horrified. And actually, each time that I talk about this with people living in Africa, in South America, and in Asia, when I tell them that in Europe, rivers are not productive anymore, they are like, what do you mean with that? It's like we cannot rely on our rivers for food. They are, let's say, empty. And that's because we cannot compare. We don't have that clear records. But we know that the last 50 years, since the 70s, migratory fish population in Europe has declined 93%. So it's very sad. We are not aware in our generation, but we used to have dinner on our local fish, every night or almost every night in Europe. And it's very sad because now that we are all of us trying to be more environmental aware, and we try maybe not to buy fish from very far away, thousands of kilometers away that needs to be transported and freeze and, unpack it. Now that we're trying to do that in Europe, we cannot actually really,
Yeah, I want to add to that point, the collapse of salmon here in Britain. The salmon was hugely important food source for people and for wildlife. And there were vast salmon runs on all of the rivers of Britain, even the Thames. Recently, some documents emerged which showed that the salmon catch on one Scottish river, the Tweed, in 1820 was 1,000 times larger than the salmon catch on the same river 100 years later in 1920.
1,000.
And the salmon catch on that one river, the Tweed, in 1920 was 1,000 times bigger than the salmon catch in all of Scotland in 2020.
Oh my God.
So we're talking about an absolute collapse in the population of migrating salmon. And it's not just river water quality and pollution and overfishing at sea, but it's the blockage of all of the little arteries and the main channels of our rivers with dams and weirs and so on that's done that.
Absolutely.
Now, tell us what your strategy is, you and your organization. Tell us what you're doing and how you're going to bring about a dam destruction revolution across Europe.
Okay, well, I don't want to frighten the people, saying dam destruction. So please don't freak out and don't. I don't want to scare people, but it's very important. Our first goal is for people, society, to understand that, of course, dams are needed, but with a lot of responsibility and using the technology and the knowledge that we know that we have in the 21st century, and that we cannot put and keep dams everywhere. Okay, so that's very important. And after that, when society is aware of this, because we are trying to deal with this social opposition that we have in many countries. I think people are afraid that we want to remove all the dams in the world. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year, even in a decade or 2 or 3. But we need to start little by little to be aware that we need to keep those dams that are really efficient, that are multi-use, and they don't have such a huge impact. That's the first thing. And after, one of our also goals is to, and what we do, is to support all these practitioners and experts are doing this already, but people don't know about their work. And actually, sometimes it's very difficult for them to carry out their work because of social opposition. And it's the other way around. These experts, they know what they're doing. And what they want to do is bring back this water quality and sustainable fisheries to their countries. Because just as you said before, these completely gone fisheries were for free and self-sustainable. You didn't have to build a hatchery and feed them. It's a bunch of fish that comes every year for free to your country, and you can fish them and create jobs, and have a secure food source. So, and another thing that we do at Dam Removal Europe is help and guide other people that want actually to recover their river. And I would love to give you a wonderful example. This man, whose name is Thor, from Norway. Thor lives in a little village in Norway. And when he found out that dams that serve no purpose and they are there in the river can be removed, because this was completely, he couldn't imagine this could be possible, right? When he found out about this, he said, I want to remove this obsolete old dam that is 100 years old, but it's blocking salmon in my river. It used to be a river full of salmon when my great-great-grandparents, and now we don't have salmon anymore. And guess what? This wonderful man who works in a milk factory, after dealing with all the paperwork, administration, and trying to get the budget, he removed this, I think it was 6-meter dam in his village. And now, next year, he's working for the next one to remove. So that's what we are trying to do, to encourage locals, to take action and improve the health of their rivers.
Pao, if people want to support your organization, how do they find you?
Yes, well, they can find us, first of all, through internet in our website, www.damremoval.eu. And actually, if they want to learn more of what is happening in Europe, they can even watch our first new documentary, Dam Busters, where we explain what's happening actually in 5 European countries. And also they can join us, in our webinars, we call Dam Removal Europe Cafés that we do every 2 or 3 months. They can join our newsletters. We have a monthly newsletters where we explain what's happening around Europe, who is taking action, their successes. And of course, we accept any kind of donation to keep this movement on supporting others. But because what we do is support others to make this happen.
And I saw that the Arcadia Fund, which is a British foundation backed by my friend Lisbeth Rousing, has recently made an enormous donation, tens of millions of euros, to a new fund called the Open Rivers Fund.
Yeah.
And the Open Rivers Fund is available now for accepting applications for funding for removing dams across geographic Europe.
Absolutely. That Open Weirs program was actually launched 1 year ago, and in November of 2021. And thanks to that fund, that is going to be 6 years in total long, they are going to help with 42.5 million of euros, and they are going to help funding the removal of barriers. And after a year, they have already funded dozens of weir removals. That because many times the problem is not also lack of knowledge of how to do this technically. Also, another problem is to find budget, to make this happen. So this wonderful fund is really supporting a lot of locals to make this happen. Even in Ukraine, Spain, Poland, many. You can go to their website and you can already check all the wonderful projects they have funded.
My hope is that as this movement grows and as more dams are ripped out, more rivers are liberated piece by piece, and the fish start to return and the water quality starts to return. My hope is that a growing understanding around the negative impacts of dams and of the beauty and the magic that happens when you remove them starts to catch a hold in the general population. Because I live in Somerset in the west of England, and there's an ongoing discussion around the potential removal of an obsolete weir on a stretch of the Somerset Avon. And the reason why the weir has not been removed is not because it serves a useful purpose, but because some locals think it's beautiful, and other locals like to catch the fish which become trapped beneath the weir. It's like a fish trap, so it's easy fishing there. And I think opening the eyes of people to the monstrosity that these dams represent is one of the most important goals of this movement. And so every little email you send, your organization, that comes into my inbox with new videos of dams being removed fills my heart with joy and with excitement. And Pao, you're doing God's work. Thank you so much for everything you do. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I'm so grateful to Pao for spending this time talking to me about the growing dam removal movement in Europe. So many of our rivers are choked by these terrible structures, and a growing realization of the harm they do means that more and more of them are now being taken out. If you want to learn more about Pao's work, look up Dam Removal Europe online and consider supporting this brilliant little speedboat of an organization. Thanks very much for listening, and if you're enjoying Rewilding the World, I'd be very grateful if you'd give us a 5-star rating on whichever platform you're using to listen to these, and if you'd spread the word among friends of yours who might enjoy it too. Next time I'll be talking to Christine Tompkins, who with her late husband Doug put together a massive rewilding program across 20 years in Patagonia. In fact, there's a film out about Doug and Chris called Wildlife. I do hope you'll join us.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about a series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species: bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.